Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here with all of you. And somebody once told me is that when you are making a presentation, especially in sales, like the kiss of death is getting the session after lunch. But I think you're going to prove us all wrong, right? That this is going to be an engaging time. We really want to have a conversation with you because I think it's always great, especially as an RPO provider, to hear it from the voice of the customer, right? Because I think it helps us learn and grow through our process. So Elizabeth and I are going to use some slides to kind of guide us so that if you don't want to be staring at us, you certainly have some visuals. But this is going to be our agenda that we're going to kind of frame the conversation around to help us understand Elizabeth's perspective, especially when we were going in and pitching for the business. And what were some of those buying signals that we were listening for, but also what was important to Elizabeth? And I think as you heard Ben's data, there's a lot of that really resonates today that it did several years ago when we were going through the process. And then we want to talk about building partnership trust. Trust is earned, as we all know. It's not gained the minute you walk in that door. You have to prove yourself every day in order to win that trust, and it goes both ways, right? Just because we say we're delivering on this activity doesn't necessarily mean that we can live up to that sometimes. There's a lot of things that we don't know. And then I think hearing from Elizabeth just where she was in the maturity cycle of her talent acquisition org. We often like to think that the org looks and sounds like a duck, walks like a duck, but we quickly find out that it isn't necessarily operating that way. And we want to leave time for Q&A. So we'll get into this. You heard the introductions, but I think it would be really helpful for you to hear from Elizabeth more about her organization and where she started with OTC to really lay the groundwork for the process that we went through to partnering.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Sure. So I joined OTC just at the tail end of 2020, so coming off the heels of the toughest year I think most of us have experienced in our careers. I can say that for mine. And I was really fortunate to have had the opportunity to work in corporate talent acquisition for several years. Came from a company that I had been with for 10 years and really had the opportunity to do a lot of exciting things in that employment. And the company had reached out to me at OTC and said, we don't have a talent acquisition function. We're a national organization. We were a family-owned business for decades, and the family retired and sold the business to private equity, and we need to, stand up some centers of excellence, to help us along the journey that we're going to be on. And so I guess I'm a sucker for a build, and so I've kind of followed that type of opportunity a few different times in my career, and I was really grateful for it. But what I walked into the first, week, I was like, okay, I don't know if I did the right thing or not. There was no structure, right? They said they had no talent acquisition. We had an ATS, which was great, but I was one of one. They had been almost completely dependent on agency staffing, and really because over the years they had acquired many small businesses. So a family of brands that none of them looked alike, none of them talked alike, they didn't have, really any continuity or consistency. And so the challenge became, okay, let's pick a few things that we know are going to be standardized, and let's just start building some processes. So for me, I think what I walked into was not only do we have to figure out, what this business really needs longer term, but how can we get some, immediate processes put into place that are going to help. And then fast forward, even just a year, the volume started to increase significantly. We got a new CEO, a new CHRO, a lot of new leaders who have been really, really doing a beautiful job of building up a lot more strategy, 3-year strategy. And so the good news is, we brought Patty in and Aspirant in to talk about how can I help, we can scale quickly in the face of a lot of really what was unestablished processes. So.
Perfect. So I think, as we went into this, our organization is a little bit unique. We have 3 segments to our business. We have a management consulting, a tech consulting, and an RPO segment. And so each of those segments run independent of each other. And so when we were going into this conversation, I happened to also know the CHRO, and he said, I want you to come in and have a conversation with Elizabeth. I don't want this to be a hard sell by any means. I want you to kind of get her introduced to RPO. She's what I would consider a first-gen buyer, right? She has never used RPO. She's used to building a center from the ground up, and as you heard, she came out of a very well-established organization with a lot of great processes and high volume hiring across the organization. So when it came in, the conversation was very open, but Elizabeth was very much, she was resistant to this. I'm going to lose control. I'm not going to be able to have a team that I want to be able to mold and develop and to bring them into the organization the way that I want them to deliver on this talent strategy. And the other piece of it is, I want you to come in a hybrid model where you're going to come alongside an existing team. And the questions that I had around that existing team is, so how are we going to make sure that we split evenly, divide in this particular area? And I think as the conversation evolved, there were two focus areas that the business needed. They needed the technicians, which are revenue generating, and they needed sales, and said, okay, these are our critical roles. The CEO that's come in has to really get this business moving because it was a family-owned business, bought by private equity, and not that they were heavy-handed at all in the business, but we all know a new buyer is expecting results on the bottom line at the end of the day, and talent's critical to that. So in the conversations that ensued, we really talked about what does a good partnership look like versus it being our partnership and taking it into Elizabeth. I wanted to hear from her what was going to be very important, and I think it's going to be helpful for Elizabeth to talk about this partnership strategy and what she expected.
Right. So I'm not used to being in a room full of people who are also in the recruiting space, so I feel like I'm with my people, so I can speak really honestly and openly that, quality for me, when you spend a lot of time in a specialized field, you're passionate about it, you know what good looks like, you've worked with some great people, and I wanted to make sure that, number one, in the face of all of the change that was happening in our business, that I could trust a group of people to do the work as though I was doing it myself. So call me a control freak, but I really care about quality. And when we were also walking into a business where we had a spectrum of experience levels of hiring managers. So we had, again, this is an industrial business for the most part. We have a lot of people there might be 5 people in one of those branches or shops. And so it was important to me that we had more of an advisory type of approach, right? That if I would walk into that shop, I would sit and ask a lot of questions, develop an understanding and not come in and just apply my process to their business. And so I needed to know that this team was going to be able to do that. So, it's much about understanding the culture as it is about also, I wanted the business to not necessarily know that these folks, that I didn't sign their paycheck, right? That I wanted them to be my team. I wanted them to have the email address that we had, be branded as though, they were on our team, all of their outreach and things like that, were part of our team, so.
And I think the other thing that was really important was this evaluation and improvement. We knew that day one when we're stepping in there that without a structure or a process to follow or even to suggest here's the best in class way to go, we were really asking Elizabeth, what does that look like? Take a step back to when you first started building that and what baby steps can we take in this process? So that really became an important piece for us to go into this evaluation and continuously improve. It's not a set it and forget it kind of model that we go through, and sometimes we get caught up in that, right? Because it's just give me recs, let me fill recs, let me be a part of this process. Elizabeth really was tasked for building a center of excellence. And how many of you have been involved in building a center of excellence from the RPO side where there wasn't an infrastructure that was already in place? And so that takes time, and it takes the ability to have that trust, and it was foundational. I'll be the first to tell you, did we hit it out of the park when we first stepped into it? No. We bumped along, right? Because some of us, as Elizabeth endeared herself as a control freak, we wanted to be a control freak as well. Wait, we have to do it our way. We wanted to try to make sure that people were buying into this concept. Well, what do you mean they don't understand RPO? And so trying to convince an organization that's a heavy industrial, it's about getting the job done, and the mindset of those individuals, it took time for us to get there in that process. And so this is how Elizabeth wanted us to roll this out. And I learned a long time ago that somebody said to me, the way you endear and win people over is by getting them to think that it's their idea. And Elizabeth will tell you that's exactly what we did. And so we built this integration phase. And it took time. It wasn't just in these 4 phases that we went through, and in 2 weeks, we're starting to take recs. It took multiple weeks. And for RPO providers, right, you're thinking about, when's the revenue coming? When are we going to start seeing we're filling recs? How are we going to measure this? So I think, Elizabeth, it'd be helpful for you to share with them, a little bit about each of these phases, if you would.
Sure. I'll try to keep it high level as well. So again, understanding that I was already in the mindset of how do we organize what's happening? Is it by job title? Is it by segment? The business also, just as another aside, in the following year, completely restructured its business into 4 verticals plus a corporate segment. So then I was having to completely shift my strategy again in terms of should we be aligned by segment, which is ultimately where we landed. It was Patty's idea in the beginning, and I'm like, we're not ready for that yet, and she was right. So we did get there. But really it was just about understanding the organization. The team for me was going to be really important. How many people do we need, and what are their skill sets specifically? Socialization to the business. So I had to get buy-in from our executive leadership team that, this was something that we wanted to do and this is how it was going to work. We'll talk about, some of the results and the metrics later, but, training and engagement, it took a while as well for us to get to the point where the hiring manager was responsive. And it was a bit of a shock to me initially. We're here to help you, and they're like, nope, we got it. We don't need you. We've been doing our thing for a long time, and we've got this. And I would say to them, okay, well, your rec's been open for 128 days. What exactly are you doing, right? And they're like, well, it's fine. So there was just a lot of education. There continues to be a lot of education in the business as well. And then, sustainability and consistency, I think, really are things that my own team and my HR team, who is, a huge partner to my team, the HR business partners, we had to really get into a place where we all understood and were holding hands on what the goal was, how we were going to do it, and then how we were going to start building some of the practices to hold people accountable. Does that cover it?
It does, and I think the other thing to add to this, if you're getting sort of a general trend as to this organization being very complex, going through a lot of changes, let's talk about the HR business partners that were also being established to run within these segments. And I think that was a big component of this as well.
Absolutely. So again, when I started, I was one of one, and there was one HR business partner. So we're talking about, 1,500 associates. That's how many things weren't established, right, when we started. And so the new CHRO also was a big proponent of making sure that we had HR representation and people leadership within the segments as well. And so we're still growing that team quite a bit to make sure that not only the training and development happens, but that they're walking alongside the hiring managers as well. So I'm not having to pick up the phone and call and say, why aren't you talking to my talent advisors, right? It is now a team effort, and I think we've come a long way in terms of those things. I could talk about responses and the SLAs that Trent was talking about, and the turnaround of 48 hours initially, I would have probably fallen on the floor had that happened. But we've gotten to the point, right, over practice and repetition and showing the value where they recognize that our time to fill or average days open means something to them, right, financially.
Perfect. And then the point about building the COE, right? Because I think a lot of organizations have a different understanding of what the COE is supposed to represent, right? And so Elizabeth was helping us to be very cautious through this process to understand that we need to simplify and formalize our approaches and our activities, right? Because sometimes we can rush to the finish line that is this big grandiose piece of the way in which we're going to operate, and it's going to unsettle the business in a dramatic way, and we are not going to be successful as partners to her based on the vision that she wants. And then we wanted to talk about building for sustainability, and that sustainability is not only in the way in which we were delivering service, but how were we going to scale with the business. In all full transparency, this was a new industry for us. You know, our organization supports manufacturing, but this was an industrial supplier, very different. Well, you might say there's a maintenance tech at one company looks the same, but they're very, very different. And this was an amalgamation of how many organizations that you brought in over time to over 100-year-old established organization who had their ways of working in their own mind as being the best. And so we had to really build a program and a team that was going to be able to scale. In the minds of most of our clients, they want you to give them every resource imaginable that you have in your arsenal. Yes, I want one of those, I want one of those, I want one of those. And we're sitting here as providers saying, how are we going to price this that's going to be effective for what they want to do if we're going to give them 40 people on a team as if they were building their own center of excellence. And so there was the education side to that as well. And I think, lastly, we wanted to make sure that, we could continue to scale with the organization and understand where they were going to be as they were acquiring new businesses. Because that CEO that came in, when we think about that alignment that Ben talked about, that was really important for us to understand. What is the strategy of the business, and where are we going to fit in that? And I asked Trent a question about workforce planning, and I said, sometimes that's an Achilles heel for us, right? Because all we may do as an RPO is put out the fires. Find me bodies, but I can't plan appropriately if you don't tell me that you need to hire 45 technicians in the middle of a desert when the workforce is about 10 people. Where are we going to find those individuals? And so that was the piece of really wanting to be that partner beyond sort of what's in front of us today and what do we need to think about for tomorrow. So, as we move through this, I think this will give you an idea of the way we operated to build this timeline. And Elizabeth, you can speak to this.
Yeah, I won't spend a ton of time on this, but we were introduced to the Aspirant team in October, give or take, of 2021. And so we were working through what is, digest our processes, look at the volume, look at whatever, anticipation we had from the business. But my goal really was to go live in January. January 1, I wanted to be, completely armed and ready to take on what was going to be the rec load. And the rec load really had almost tripled in the fourth quarter of that year, and even anticipation for growth in 2022. So I was already right at our ELT offsites going, oh my God, how am I going to scale this up? So, we managed to get through that initial piece, but really, I would just say, we had to put some governance in place. We had to build our SLAs. We had to figure out who was doing what and who was responsible for what, and we also had to manage through the change. So, without going through a whole bunch of details, the time frame of us implementing the RPO was, I would say, early to mid-October, and then our true effective date was January 1, and we've been together since then. So.
Perfect. So Elizabeth is going to carry us home through the rest of this, and she's going to talk about her ideal team. And, I wasn't kidding when she said she wanted 40 people to be staffed on this account. And I walked out of the room and said, you don't need 40 people. And she's like, we're going to argue about this. And I'm like, sure, we are going to argue about it, but you're not going to get 40 people at the end of the day. In a very friendly people. Okay, so it was 25.
See? So again, I think going back to knowing what was going to be needed as a strategic TA function is not just filling jobs. So it's about having some flexibility within sourcing. So again, keep in mind that the business really was still not in the process of doing great projections. We were still reorganizing. We were losing a lot of people. We were 100% reactive, really, in what we were doing. And so I wanted to make sure that I had at least a talented group of people who could almost be an account manager, which is what we deemed a talent advisor. The talent advisor is not really a traditional recruiting role. They're not just generating resumes. They're advising, they're teaching, they're coaching, they're educating our really immature hiring population on how this works. So I went from a team of 3, including myself, to a team of basically 11 or 12 people overnight, and that included what the business also asked for was they needed support in scheduling, right? The speed of getting through this work and the communication back and forth from trying to get a candidate to respond to them. I was not aware that that was a thing I could have. So as part of this solution, it was very exciting that we brought in a candidate care team. Their responsibility started out really just straight up scheduling to improve our time to fill, making sure that the candidate experience was starting to improve. I can't say enough about the candidate care team. They're really the unsung heroes, I think, in our business because they're behind the scenes really getting everything done and making sure, that candidates are where they're supposed to be. And the talent advisor and the team lead, I think for me, this is where I struggled a little bit, control freak. So I was really excited to have some leadership so that I could start stepping out of some of the day-to-day weeds and having a team lead. It took a little bit of time, I think, for that person to get up to speed and so that we really understood what their responsibility should be versus when I should, be part of that. And I was heavily involved really for the first year, building that team environment, building the engagement, really setting the expectations of how we operate in the business. And then the relationship director really, which has been Patty for the most part for me, but just having those things were things I've not had in my past, right? Those are things that I was responsible for, and so, I think overall, building that team and something that we could implement quickly, that we had results very quickly, and even though we were growing together, we were working very quickly together.
And I think the other side of this is this concept of co-employment, right? So we all sort of walk that fine line when we're putting recruiting resources in there and the desire to have a team, right? And so, there was a lot of times that we had to have some conversations, Elizabeth and I, to say, now this is where something may cross co-employment, right? You're not necessarily coaching them on their performance per se, but there are certain words or things that are being communicated that we need to kind of balance through that process. And so, Elizabeth enjoys having that team, and that team enjoys being a part of learning from her, really growing so that they themselves can grow to the next level from that recruiter into a team lead to take on more projects and activities, because recruiting's exciting for many people, but there's also this need to grow their skills, right? And how do you do that beyond promoting them into a senior recruiter, right? Or a team lead? They're still doing the day-to-day functions. And Elizabeth was great about giving them opportunities to own their segment, to go in and learn about their segment, do mapping about talent and labor and supply in the segment in the geographies in which they were operating in. So it was very important that the team actually was learning and growing with the organization as well. And so when we moved into this, I think this will give you a good sense of where Elizabeth's, maturity process was and where she was trying to head toward. And we had to know that, right? And I think we as providers step in and ask those questions to get a sense or a gauge of where organizations see themselves on the maturity model. So we'll let Elizabeth kind of talk about this very quickly, and then we're almost bringing this home.
Yep. So hopefully everyone's seen a maturity model. This is a teeny slice of it. So when I came in, I really wanted to build a maturity model just for myself alone to start categorizing all kinds of different things. Where are we with technology? Where are we with process? Where are we with people? Where are we with business alignment? But overall, really the goal from a TA perspective was we walked into, basically we had an ATS. That was it, and people needed to fill jobs. And so really kind of helping the leadership understand that we needed to start building, we needed to invest in the team, we needed to have the processes, we needed to have an advertising strategy, which we had never done. We didn't even have a marketing department at the time. So there were a whole bunch of different things that really I kind of put on this journey and showed them. Some of these we're going to get there right away, and we need to have them right away, and other things are going to be sort of world-class. So in my world, I've come from businesses that are amazing, right? They've taken the journey and they've arrived at the point where they have these huge teams and huge budgets and they have all these things, and we're still a pretty small organization. So, but to compete, which is what we needed to be able to do, I needed to be able to show them sort of, these are the things you need to be doing in TA. Quite frankly, with all due respect, they just didn't have the experience with TA at all. And so no one in the leadership team had anybody show them these things before, at least in the way that they had. And so it was a fun experience, a lot of influencing, a lot of discussions, a lot of input. But really the ultimate goal for me would be to get to the point where they're coming to us all the time and saying, what's your predictive data tell you? We're going to be expanding into this particular market. Which city should we pick, right? Let's talk about TA from a labor perspective and growth as a business. So ultimately, I feel like right now we're between the current and maturing state, quite frankly. We have an established practice. We're hitting our numbers very well. And we're continuing, to be able to now give them data. I send offensively a weekly TA talent update every Friday. My entire ELT gets it. They see how many offers we made. They see all the data, right? Here's who's starting next week. Here are the trends that we're seeing. Here are the sites that are working for us. Here are the number of positions that we have open. 70% of them right now, it's going to shock you, are replacements. So they need to see those things to continue to understand, right, what we are, right? I know turnovers next year, but so it's just the journey, right? And that's, but without this team, I couldn't do those things because I would be down in the weeds doing all of this work really the way I thought I was supposed to do it. So, okay. So just a couple of highlights, just some results. So the initiative, when we got the ELT buy-in was we want to move away from an agency-dependent model, which again, was shocking to me, the dollar amount that we were spending on agency fees. Because it was expensed to the business unit, nobody really talked about it. They didn't see it, they didn't understand it. But when I put the number in front of them and shared with them what the cost avoidance could be if we had reduced our cost to hire, we had consistent practices, we put a time to fill average of, don't laugh, 45 days, but right, we were at 90 days, 120 days, 300 days. And I was like, why is this job even open? We're just waiting for the right person. So we had a lot of work to do. So really for me, the desired outcome and the KPIs that I shared with them were, we're going to improve our time to fill. We're going to improve greatly our cost per hire. We're going to focus on manager engagement and candidate experience and employer brand recognition, which we're still building right now. And really then the approach was to build the flexible staffing model, which has served us very well. When things were a little bit lower earlier this year, we were able to scale the team back, and now we're adding people back in as our volume starts to increase again. Streamlining processes, we've already talked about all these things. The other big piece that I did to layer in was to also establish a national vendor list of temporary staffing agencies to supplement the work I didn't have time to do. And so we negotiated national contracts, we provided that information to them. They can use it as they need to if they need just a 2-day thing, but it was really kind of giving them the library of resources. We're gonna do all the staffing work for your permanent jobs, exempt and non-exempt. And then we're going to give you, some tools that you can use for right now. So the result was, again, when I started, they would have been thrilled with 90 days, fill, because they thought that was great. And so we challenged ourselves to start with 45 days, and we actually beat that number, which you'll see on the next slide. Go back for just 1 second, sorry. The other KPI was, spending 20% average on a placement fee, at $1.4 million that they had spent the year before on not that many hires, to really look at if we're going to hire 700 people, the cost avoidance is multi-million-dollar cost avoidance for us to go with this route. So, and then the other piece was really just the scalability of the team. Next slide. So in 2022, we achieved 43 days as our average time to fill, which for me was a good baseline. Is it the best that we can do? No. Does it show the business, this is across technician roles all the way up to director level roles. Some positions are going to take longer, the specified roles take longer, the sales roles take a little bit longer, but at the very least, we were able to say, this is the goal we're setting, and this is what we're going to do. So far this year in 2023, we're averaging around 33 days. So again, a win. We're excited about that. Time to find candidates, again, we're getting candidates in the hands of the hiring manager much more quickly than we were before, which is, and now we're holding them accountable, Trent, to responding. So if you're not responding, we have an escalation process on my team. So if the position's nearing 45 days, which is really the goal, and we're not anywhere near that, guess who's on the phone, right? Maybe it's not at 48 hours, but we're teaching the business, right? We're starting to get into the process. It's not punitive, it's consultative. It's like, let's talk about what's happening. We usually come up with a solution. Even just recently, we have a role that's called a motor winder. Does anyone here know what a motor winder does? Exactly. So this is a human being that is literally winding with wires, a motor that goes into these giant motors for mining, right? And there's like 12 of them in the United States, I think. But it was really just about, we're not paying enough. And the whole team comes together and we give all the data to them. And guess what we did? We went back strategically and looked at, as a team, we need to pay more. We need to have more a project based on recruitment. We need to have a school, all these different things. So overall, I would say the one thing that's not mentioned in here is that while I was tasked with talent acquisition, I also then inherited talent development about a year ago, just based on a change in our own team. I could not have taken on that responsibility if it weren't for the work that we've done in such a short period of time. So I've become a promoter, and so I've been really fortunate to have this team come alongside. So.
Well, thank you all for your time.